What's really going on the moon? An amateur astronomer from Germany discovered something massive moving across the moon, and it's clearly not of human origin and not sent by NASA or any other space agency. So what could it be? A UFO? A normal moon glow, or a phenomenon that we have never seen before? Ever since people have been observing the moon, they have seen lights there for which there is no explanation. This is how the story of the man in the moon came about, and it makes our blood run cold when we consider what it really means. The moon is a celestial body that is firmly attached to the Earth. A special feature of this bond is that the fact that the moon always shows us the same side, and for thousands of years, no one has seen what the other side actually looks like and what is going on there. So it's no wonder that the moon has always been the center of intense speculation and wild stories. In modern times, more and more amateur astronomers are looking to the moon to enjoy the beauty of the Earth's satellite or to catch first-hand impressions of secret processes. A space enthusiast from Germany looked towards the moon with his telescope and saw this. The light is small at first and immediately arouses the viewer's interest with its delicate reddish glow. What could it be? NASA usually explains light phenomena and spots that seem to appear in front of the moon as satellites reflecting the light of the sun. But this object immediately shows us that it is certainly not a satellite. It slowly approaches the moon, and it becomes clear that this light is not passing in front of the moon. It seems to be heading for the surface of it, and suddenly the light scatters in a triangular shape in front of the object. The red becomes even more clearly visible, and the object more and more mysterious. What looks tiny to us here must be a gigantic object compared to the size of the moon. At some point, the traces of light disappeared, and it was as if it had never been there. Since the video was published, the internet community has been speculating about what this object could have been. Is the video real, or is it fake? We don't know, but we do know that sightings of strange objects and lights around the moon are almost a daily occurrence, and there may be a reason for this. 1, 2, or 3 points. Over the decades, dozens of videos and photographs of light sightings around the moon have accumulated. Sometimes 1, 2, or 3 conspicuous lights can be seen. Even when the moon is brightly lit, objects are sighted that do not appear as bright as light, but are visible as dark spots in front of the moon. Scientists explain the bright lights as the transient lunar phenomena, or TLP. Reports of unusual light observations on the moon date back to the 6th century. Even in the present day, scientists have observed lights, color changes, or even bright darkenings that cause temporary changes in the appearance of the moon. The phenomena have been systematically cataloged since 1958, but no one has yet found an explanation, despite the extremely strange TLP phenomena. Respected scientific circles do not want to know anything about aliens and their activities on the moon. Allegedly, gases escaping from the moon's interior and reflecting the sun's rays cause phenomena such as the red light we saw at the beginning. Other TLPs glow blue, green, or even purple, and everything is said to be completely normal and explainable. TLPs range from small, point-like lights to larger, glowing areas. Sometimes they appear as short-lived flashes or as subtle, changing shades of color on the lunar surface. A real flying saucer from 1975? It is often rumored that even Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were not completely alone on the moon during their moonwalk at the end of the 1960s and saw several spaceships observing them. Allegedly, NASA wants to cover everything up, but that's not quite true. This video, which was allegedly recorded by James Irwin, an astronaut on the Apollo 15 mission, was never concealed or covered up. However, nobody wanted to admit that this thing looks an awful lot like a flying saucer. The official line was that the apparent object could also be a reflection of light. But look for yourself at the shadow it casts below it, which clearly shows that the disc-like object is hovering above the surface of the moon. Something very similar can be seen here. Again, NASA claimed it was a rock, but again the shadow reveals something hovering in the air. Could these all be coincidences? Probably not. We don't have any hard evidence of aliens on the moon, but we do have some interesting clues. In the 1970s, the clairvoyant medium Ingo Swann was asked by the FBI to look at the moon via remote viewing. Among other things, Swann saw some highly intelligent aliens mining on the far side of the moon. Fascinatingly, rumors about mining on the moon have been around longer than NASA and modern telescopes. Somehow, centuries ago, people came up with the idea that there were people, or men, living on the moon who were active there, and later it became stories that this man or men could be responsible for the moon's glow. Swan had to keep quiet about his mission for 10 years, and then only a small, dedicated community of UFO researchers and paranormal enthusiasts believed him. In the years before his FBI experience, Swan was a respected scientific medium who correctly scanned the atmosphere of Jupiter long before the first probes reached the gas giant. What is happening there? Can you imagine that until 1959, no human had ever seen the far side of the moon? The Russians sent Luna 3 once around the moon that year, but kept most of the images for themselves. So, of course, nobody knew what this nation, which was extremely hostile to the United States during the Cold War, had seen on the far side of the moon. NASA's Lunar Orbiter 1 did not reach the far side of the moon until 1966, and allegedly, there was not much to see behind the moon's face that we know, apart from a rugged landscape. However, we must also concede that these probes were not able to show details of the lunar surface or recognize aliens mining in a crater. This only became possible much later thanks to high-resolution images. Today, thanks to Google Moon, even amateurs can scan the moon and turn over every stone. This repeatedly leads to astonishing discoveries, and sometimes areas of the satellite images appear suspiciously blurred, which is why it's assumed that we normal Earthlings are not supposed to see some of the things going on there. Is this still normal? Explaining individual lights with TLPs may still make some sense, but what are we to make of 3 lights flying in formation? When NASA once again declares that everything is completely normal, it's probably trying to pull the lunar wool over our eyes, because there are certainly no light phenomena to be seen here that originate from mysterious outgassing from the moon. If we connect the 3 dots, we always end up with the same shape, a typical and easily recognizable triangle. This shape often appears in connection with UFO sightings on the moon and also on Earth. In this photo, the 3 typical lights are so bright that the shape of the spaceship in the middle is recognizable. These flying objects are regularly noticed and reported almost everywhere on Earth. In 2021, these images from Herefordshire in England attracted attention. In the same year, one of these flying triangles appeared over California. And a year later, a very similar UFO was spotted over Karlsruhe. Given this frequency of sightings, we must ask ourselves what these flying objects around the Earth and on the moon want. This question divides even the opinions of UFO enthusiasts and para-researchers. Some believe that the aliens are watching us, and others even assume that extraterrestrial races maintain contact with governments or certain organizations without the normal world population noticing much of it. The moon could be a kind of stopover or base for beings who either want to mine raw materials there, as Ingo Swann said, or keep an eye on us Earthlings. In any case, Ingo Swann said that the aliens he had seen on the moon were not friendly towards humans, and, like Swann himself, they were mentally gifted. When the aliens realized Swann's presence, they became angry, and the FBI immediately aborted the attempt. Of course, we can ask ourselves how this is supposed to work with humans on the moon in the future if there are bad-tempered aliens around. On the other hand, although the moon is much smaller than the Earth, it is also big enough to keep out of the way, and we cannot rule out the possibility that NASA, the FBI, or the US government have not made contact with the men on the moon in the meantime. Fiction or reality? Who hasn't seen the face of Mars, the Martian pyramids, or human and pyramid-shaped apparitions on the moon? In the vast majority of cases, these objects are so-called pareidolia. Our brain creates images from inanimate objects such as stones or sand dunes that have something to do with another thing that is familiar to us. We then see shadows of people, bones, or things and structures that look like buildings. Many of these pareidolia have now been unmasked. Thanks to the latest Mars and Moon probes, such phenomena have been observed and explained from other angles. So among the many UFO and alien sightings, there are certainly a large number of mistakes or even fakes. But what about this? This again looks suspiciously like a pseudo-pyramid on the moon. But wait a minute. There are 8 lights arranged in an exact 90-degree triangle, and nature really doesn't produce anything like that. And this can't be an optical illusion either. The picture led to a lot of speculation, and once again, the ideas about secret, underground alien bases on the moon came to life. Allegedly, there are numerous cavities inside the moon where spaceships, some several hundred meters long, are said to be deposited. Strangely enough, even renowned scientists have now found evidence that the moon is hollow inside. This came about because seismographs recorded moonquakes that resonated so strangely as if the moon was hollow inside. Moonquakes normally occur as very gentle tremors caused by geological processes on the moon. In this case, however, a meteor struck and caused a strong quake that went right through the moon, making the hollow moon phenomenon noticeable for the first time. What did Chang'e 5 discover on the moon? The Chang'e 5 mission landed on the moon on December 1st, 2020, after a 23-day journey through space. The dual probe had been launched from the Wenchang spacecraft launch site of Hainan province of China. This is the same site from where predecessor probes Chang'e 3, numerous satellites, as well as the components and supply flights for the Chinese space station have been launched. After successfully separating from the orbiter, Chang'e 5's lander touched down in a lunar area that scientists called Oceanus Procellarum. This region near the lunar equator is a vast, flat area on the far side of the moon, characterized by its extreme breadth and the proximity of the 5,250-foot-high Mons Rumker. The objective of the Chang'e 5 mission was very clearly defined. The nearly 8-ton probe was to collect samples from the lunar surface and bring lunar rock back to Earth for the first time in 40 years. For the very first time in human history, this mission was to extract samples from the deep layers of the moon. In recent years, scientists had come to realize that the moon might be very different from what we had long thought. It could even be possible that the moon harbors a large reservoir of mineral resources that could solve our energy problem. After successful drilling, the lander sent the samples back to its orbiter via the Ascent module, and the return journey to Earth began after only 14 Earth days. The mission was celebrated worldwide as a great achievement of Chinese space travel, clearly elevating China into the ranks of the great spacefaring nations of this Earth. The return of the samples was eagerly anticipated by international researchers. We can already reveal this much: the hopes for new groundbreaking insights about the moon were more than fulfilled. Water in glass? On December 17th, 2020, the return capsule entered Earth's atmosphere and landed successfully in the sparsely populated expanse of Mongolia. As soon as the samples were secured, the experts got to work. With great anticipation, it was expected whether the drillings would confirm the existing theories about the moon's creation, or if the moon's interior would reveal an entirely different truth. Scientists believe that a planet the size of Mars collided with the Earth more than 4 billion years ago, creating the moon. During the collision, a part of the Earth broke off and was covered with molten rock. Until now, it was assumed that the temperatures were so high that all the water evaporated forever. The moon was considered a parched celestial body that was slowly shrinking, or, in other words, drying out. In the recent months and years, telescopes and probes have found large deposits of water ice in craters near the lunar poles. The narrative shifted, and everyone started questioning where the ice on the moon came from and why it had never been noticed in more than 50 years of intense lunar exploration. NASA plans to send astronauts near the poles as part of the Artemis mission in the coming 10 years. Once there, the astronauts are to determine whether the water deposits on the moon can be utilized. In a planned permanent station on the moon, the water could provide for humans, grow plants, and also be used to produce fuel. Now, the discovery of Chang'e 5 could completely overthrow all these plans, as this rover has discovered the seemingly impossible on the small, inconspicuous celestial body. Large quantities of water, and that's everywhere on the moon. In the drill samples, researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences found an unusually high density of tiny glass particles. These tiny glass crystals have most likely formed when meteorites struck the moon. Hitching a ride on the comet could also have brought water to the moon, which is now frozen at the poles. Upon closer examination, the impact glass beads revealed another secret that simply left researchers speechless, because inside the beads they found water. Each particle only contains a tiny portion of water, but in bulk, the water deposits on the moon are enormous. Can you imagine that? Large amounts of water on the moon? That also sounded unusual to us, but the Chinese study leaves no doubt. In each individual crystal, there are 2,000 parts water to 1 million parts. So, as you can see, it's really small, and the beads are not even a millimeter in size. But the bulk is made up of water, and now brace yourselves, because when the concentration is converted to the entire moon, there are 2,000 kilograms of water in every metric ton of lunar soil. Under Earth conditions and in liquid state, this is pretty much equivalent to 2,000 liters, which is a whole lot. The likelihood that these glass particles are even distributed across the entire moon is high. After all, the entire moon has been bombarded by comets, asteroids, and meteorites for billions of years. This implies that the moon could be abundant in water from the equator to the poles. Future manned moon missions, therefore, wouldn't necessarily have to land at the poles and then laboriously attempt to utilize the water ice there. The water from these beads can be easily isolated through heating, thus providing moon settlers with fresh water anywhere on the celestial body. In further investigations, Chinese researchers were even able to demonstrate that the water enclosed within the lunar crystals was once produced by the sun. The theory suggests that positively charged hydrogen atoms from the solar wind made their way into the glass beads and mixed with the oxygen contained within them. Studies of the different types of hydrogen atoms in the samples have shown that these glass beads can also release part of their hydrogen charge at high temperatures when they are heated by solar radiation. The total amount of water wealth in the form of impact glass beads is estimated to be around 298.7 billion short tons, according to current estimates. In 2010, NASA estimated the water quota at the moon's North Pole to be 661.4 million short tons. Compared to previous assumptions that the moon was bone dry, this is truly enormous. Even compared to our Earth, the abundance of water is impressive. Our blue home of water and rock is estimated to hold approximately 1.47 quintillion short tons of water. Now you're probably wondering if there could ever be a time when this moon ice melts, or if the moon could be transformed into a landscape with rivers, lakes, or entire oceans through a chemical or mechanical change in the water glass beads. Of course, we also asked ourselves this question and investigated the matter. Although such ideas would be fantastic, it will unfortunately hardly be possible to let water flow on the moon's surface. The moon has virtually no atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and only very low atmospheric pressure. Water can only liquefy under certain conditions, and these simply aren't present on the moon. Since the moon does not have a particularly high density and has only a very weak magnetic field, it's also not expected that changes will occur here in the future. However, it's a completely different story with Mars, where liquid water once flowed. Traces of erosion have confirmed this multiple times, and audacious plans for terraforming aim to transform particularly the frozen Mars water at the poles into liquid water and thus into seas and lakes through an artificially induced greenhouse effect. However, experts also doubt here whether this would ever be realistically achievable. But let's go back to the moon and the fascinating findings of the Chinese astronauts. The glass beads revealed other things besides just water. The latest exciting discovery could soon trigger a real rush to the moon. Could our energy problems be solved with this? The samples collected by the Chinese space probe are unique. Taken from deep layers, they are about 1 billion years older than all the samples collected from the surface by astronauts during the American Apollo program. Most likely, these glass beads have been formed predominantly over the last 2 billion years through massive meteorite, asteroid, and comet impacts. To generate the necessary temperatures, impact dimensions are needed that are roughly comparable to the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs on Earth about 68 million years ago. As a relatively small celestial body, the moon has been exposed to massive cosmic influences throughout its developmental history, and it's a wonder that the moon has survived these bombardments so well. Researchers believe that this is due, among other things, to its low density and the thick cushioning layer of dust. The moon's turbulent life could have produced a whole range of peculiarities from which we may benefit enormously in the future. Chang'e 5 found another crystal in the lunar rock, and it could be significant because this moon crystal is made of a substance that was previously completely unknown. Researchers were amazed and dumbfounded at the same time when they noticed that this structure has a crucial component for nuclear fusion. For those not quite familiar with nuclear power, it's worth mentioning at this point that Earth's energy problem would be solved as soon as we have the possibilities for nuclear fusion. So far, we have used the principle of nuclear fission to meet our enormous energy hunger. However, resulting radioactive waste has become a massive problem. In nuclear fusion, light atomic nuclei are fused into heavier nuclei. This releases a far larger amount of energy than nuclear fission, and the residues are radiation-free. For decades, physicists worldwide have been working on this technology, but so far without success, because the pressure and therefore the energy input necessary to make the nuclei fuse exceeds the energy gain. The problem would be solved instantly if we could find a mineral or an atom that inherently has an increased readiness for fusion. And that is exactly what has just happened. The isolated phosphate mineral was named Chang'e in honor of the mission and the Chinese moon goddess Chang'e. Future research at the Beijing Research Institution of Uranium Geology will show whether the fusion-ready helium-3 isotope will be usable on Earth. So, could it soon be that mining begins on the moon, spacecraft bring rock to Earth on a daily basis, and our planet can take a breather for the time being? Well, we don't know that yet. The Chang'e 6 mission is set to collect further samples from the far side of the moon starting in 2024 and bring them back to Earth. The developments are currently being watched closely, and of course, NASA has also taken notice. Experts have calculated that the entire US can be powered for a year with about 27.6 short tons of helium-3. This easily corresponds to the cargo volume of a space shuttle. Helium-3 from the moon is estimated to have an economic value of $3 billion per short ton. In fact, this discovery could trigger a gold rush and attract many nations and companies to the moon. Some major energy corporations have already shown interest to NASA in investing money in future space missions. This could mean that NASA's Artemis program gets a significant boost. China's lunar base. Many wonder why the Chinese have suddenly emerged with such a presence in space. Hardly anyone in the West knew until now that China has built its own space station that can rival the ISS in size and sophistication any day. Nor were people aware that China builds better rockets than NASA and is technologically close to SpaceX rockets, which shine primarily for their reusability. It almost seems as if China has secretly and quietly molted to this place to now show all the world what the nation is made of, and above all, what it intends to do with space. The country's ambitions go far beyond national prestige. China's researchers know what treasures the moon holds, and it almost seems as if the country's scientists had the right intuition when they put their full faith in the moon instead of pouring billions into Mars exploration. China has made discoveries on the moon that will change your view of space forever, and Michio Kaku only recently leaked the full extent of these shocking discoveries. The latest discoveries are just the beginning, and as early as 2028, China plans to establish its first manned lunar base. This would put the country on the moon well ahead of NASA and SpaceX, and could give it a decisive advantage. To fully develop the moon, Chinese engineers and scientists are building on optimizing nuclear energy for reliable propulsion and continuing to develop space capsules, vehicles, and robots. Landers, orbiters, and rovers, as well as the first 3D printer, are expected to land on the moon soon. As part of the Chang'e 6, 7, and 8 missions, which will be launched in the coming years, Chinese astronauts will most likely be the first humans ever to build infrastructure on the moon. Chang'e 6 is expected to return up to 2 kilograms of lunar material in 2026 and address the question of other available resources on the moon. At the same time, a new lunar relay satellite will launch to provide seamless communications with missions to the moon's south pole. Immediately following Chang'e 6 will be the Chang'e 7 mission, which will be present with an orbiter, a lander, a rover, and a mini flight detector. The goals are to explore the lunar topography, take more rock samples, and explore the lunar environment. In 2028, Chang'e 8 will bring resource utilization technology to the field and create the first 3D printed components for the future lunar base. Then, everything will be ready for astronauts to permanently reside on the moon starting in 2030. China is allocating billions of dollars to space travel, and this mega investment could more than pay off in the future, because things have been found on the moon that no one thought were possible. Water on the moon. You probably still have the idea in your head that the moon is a rather dry, gray, and boring place. But what if we told you that there are millions of tons of water on the moon? The moon's abundance of water was truly not apparent at first glance. It wasn't until the Chang'e 5 rover discovered how much water is really found on the Earth's satellite. Chang'e 5 took some samples in the lunar region called Oceanus Procellarum, or Ocean of Storms, and sent them back to Earth. Once back in China, scientists from the Beijing Astronomical Faculty analyzed the samples and found something incredible. There were a great many tiny glass beads in about a handful of lunar dust. And each one of these beads had a tiny amount of water trapped in the glass. These beads were probably formed in the course of large impact events, such as the impacts of meteorites and asteroids. The tremendous temperatures turned the lunar dust into glass, a phenomenon we also know from impact craters on Earth. Since the moon has been exposed to many impacts, scientists suspect that these glass beads are found everywhere on the moon, from the equator to the poles. The water in the glass is probably a direct result of solar radiation. Scientists believe that positively charged hydrogen atoms from solar winds enter the glass beads and combine with oxygen. When the sun heats these beads, they give up some of their hydrogen. Strictly speaking, there could be about 2,000 kilograms of water in each ton of lunar dust. And even more amazing is that this water can be extracted from the beads simply by heating them. In total, the glass beads are said to hold a water reservoir totaling 270 billion tons. In 2010, NASA estimated that the craters at the moon's north pole contain about 600 million tons of ice. So, the water resources on the moon are vast, although they can never occur as free-flowing water as they do here on Earth because of the temperatures and the lack of atmosphere. Artificial lunar lakes and rivers are unthinkable, but the vast reservoir of water could provide a source of life for astronauts and future lunar settlers. Water not only serves astronauts as drinking water or to irrigate lunar greenhouses, water can also be used to produce fuel. But that's not all. The lunar samples brought back from Chang'e 5 have revealed another secret. With helium-3 into the new energy age. In addition to water, Chang'e 5 also has a completely new mineral that so far has only been found on the moon. The crystal, which was formed about 1.2 billion years ago during a period of volcanic activity on the moon, contains an extraordinary ingredient, helium-3. Helium-3 is a substance that could solve our energy problem immediately and even stop climate catastrophe. The isotope is extremely fusion-friendly and could finally bring mankind the possibility of generating energy from atomic fusion. Atomic fusion produces far more energy than splitting atoms and leaves no radiating waste. So, fusion reactors would be far more effective and environmentally friendly at the same time. So far, however, we do not use this energy source because helium-3 is so rare on Earth that it would not be worthwhile to start up a fusion reactor just to consume this minimal deposit. With the likely gigantic deposit of helium-3 on the moon, that could change in the near future. So far, there is still a major challenge in harnessing these resources. Transporting the rock from the moon to the Earth is an effort whose costs are difficult to calculate at the moment. However, it is already certain that the loading capacity of a space shuttle alone could supply the US with energy for a year. But no man has been on the moon for almost 50 years, and even the Apollo astronauts visited the moon for only a few hours. We need to develop the moon now if we don't want to take away this change to a clean energy age. The prospect of being able to mine helium-3 on the moon continues to drive NASA and Chinese space efforts in a positive sense. Major energy companies on Earth have already indicated interest and could provide financial support for future missions. As early as 2024, the Chang'e mission will collect samples from the dark side of the moon for the first time. Is there danger on the moon? Before humans can dream of developing the moon economically, we need to learn more about this celestial body. We do not yet know what we might trigger there with our activities or what hitherto underestimated dangers lurk on the moon. Chang'e 4, China's first lunar rover, landed on the moon on January 3, 2019, and made another startling discovery at its landing site on the far side of the moon from Earth: an unusual gel-like substance. This discovery happened more by accident as the rover was preparing to take its daily rest break to avoid the heat of the midday sun. As the camera is lowered, a scientist noticed something odd in one of the images: a gel-like substance with a strange color. Closer examination with the rover's infrared spectrometers failed to yield any known data about the substance's composition, which in plain English means it is completely unknown. Experts have since puzzled over whether it is a remnant of a violent collision with a meteorite or a previously unknown form of matter. Unfortunately, China has not yet released any images of this substance. With the rest of the scientific world, the Chinese space travelers shared only the basic information about the unusual find. This, of course, has also fueled rumors surrounding a possible hint of extraterrestrial life on the far side of the moon. For a long time, there have been suspicions that there are aliens on the side of the moon that we can never see from Earth. Mahesh Anand, a planetary scientist at the Open University in the United Kingdom, on the other hand, believes that the mysterious find is some kind of liquid glass. An atomic bomb test in New Mexico produced a glassy mineral called trinitite, which resembles the descriptions given by Chinese scientists. Anand added to his report, however, that given the sparse information about the substance, it's difficult to definitively confirm what it is made of. Still, we don't know for sure what it is, and we know very little overall about what else is hiding on the moon. Chang'e 4's find is not the first discovery of a strangely colored substance on the moon. The majority of the lunar surface is covered with fine gray dust known as lunar regolith. But back in 1972, astronauts Harrison Schmitt and Gene Cernan stumbled upon strange orange dust right next to their landing site during the Apollo 17 mission. At the time, scientists concluded that the colorful dust was most likely created in the wake of a volcanic explosion about 3.64 billion years ago. Probes have now scanned and repeatedly measured the entire moon, and thanks to the latest technologies, even we can zoom in on almost every corner of the moon, but the surface may still hold surprises that no one expects now. The historical significance of the Apollo 11 mission. The Apollo 11 mission marked an unforgettable moment in human history. When the Saturn V rocket took off on July 16, 1969, it was not only a technical masterpiece on its way to space, but also a symbol of human courage and exploration. Millions of people around the world cheered in front of their television screens as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon just ahead of his colleague, Buzz Aldrin, declaring, "This is one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." On that day, a new chapter in space travel was opened. The success of the mission was ultimately also the result of an intense race between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both superpowers wanted to demonstrate their technological and scientific superiority and conquer space. The successful US moon landing was therefore not only a scientific triumph, but also a significant geopolitical statement and gave the US renewed self-confidence. The fact that the Russians had put the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, tore a painful wound into the nation's spirit. When Americans were the first to set foot on the moon, this disgrace was not forgotten. Armstrong and Aldrin stayed on the moon for only a few hours, collecting a total of 21.5 kilograms of rock and lunar dust, revolutionizing our understanding of the moon and leaving behind some devotional objects, such as a plaque commemorating the deceased astronauts of the Apollo 1 mission, a plaque commemorating the visit of the first men to the moon, and of course, the US flag. Groundbreaking at that time were not only the impressions of the moon itself, but the views of how actually our Earth looks from space and from the moon. Our world became a beautiful blue dot floating through a dark space. With all the heroic deeds and milestones, as well as the jubilation surrounding Armstrong and Aldrin, one aspect of the moon landing was somehow always forgotten. This was true as early as the 1960s and has hardly changed to this day. This circumstance is basically the one man who is known as the forgotten astronaut to only a few space fans to this day. Michael Collins was the third astronaut of Apollo 11, who, however, did not land on the moon, but stayed in the space shuttle and circled the moon several times, while Armstrong and Aldrin explored the moon itself. Michael Collins, the forgotten astronaut. Michael Collins had a no less important task during the mission. His job was to control the command module that all three astronauts had used to fly to the moon. During the lunar walk, the experienced pilot continued to navigate the spacecraft in lunar orbit and waited for his two colleagues to return. Collins had to ensure that the Columbia module remained in a stable orbit and was ready to pick up the lunar landing module upon its return from the lunar surface. During his orbits around the moon, Collins traversed the dark side of the moon, where he was cut off from all communication with Earth for about 48 minutes per orbit. During this time, Collins was the loneliest person in the universe, farther from Earth than any other human being before and completely on his own. He later described these moments as mostly quiet and peaceful, not lonely or isolating. One of the most critical maneuvers Collins had to perform was rendezvousing and docking with the lunar landing module after Armstrong and Aldrin completed their historic lunar landing. A mistake here would have had catastrophic consequences and possibly stranded Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon. But Collins executed the maneuver with precision and skill. Although Collins had never received the attention that his colleagues had, he was proud of his role and understood the importance of his duties to the success of the mission. The press, on the other hand, stylized Collins as the overlooked hero of spaceflight history. The astronauts of the Apollo 11 mission. Thanks to the moon landing, they were truly heroes, but hardly anyone actually knows who Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were in real life. Neil Armstrong grew up in a small town in Ohio. Even as a boy, he was fascinated by the sky, and by the age of 16, he had a pilot's license. Armstrong could fly before he could drive a car, and this passion naturally brought him to the Navy. After serving as a naval pilot in the Korean War, he became a test pilot and flew some of the fastest and most dangerous aircraft in the world. After the war, he went straight into NASA's space programs and, thanks to his calm and level-headed nature, was the desired candidate to command the lunar flight. Compared to Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin was a more energetic and charismatic man. Born in New Jersey into a military family, Aldrin seemed destined for the skies. He was not only a brilliant engineer, but also a gifted fighter pilot. During the lunar landing, it was his job to guide the Eagle landing module safely to the lunar soil. Michael Collins was born in Italy when his father served as a military attaché in the Italian capital. After a childhood in Europe, Collins made his way to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and the third man of the Apollo 11 mission first became a test pilot. Together, these three men formed a team that was a perfect match not only for their professional excellence, but also for their unique life stories and personalities. After the moon landing, however, the three are said to have parted ways again. Aldrin and Armstrong still often appeared together on television, and Collins became something like the Phantom of the moon landing. Only in present time did the interest of the man who was the first to see the backside of the moon increase again, and for a very good reason. What did Michael Collins really see? The dark side of the moon, that part that never faces the Earth, has always captured people's imagination. When Michael Collins circled the moon alone, he was the very first person ever to see this side of the moon. In the present day, wild rumors of spaceships and relics of an extraterrestrial civilization swirl around the far side of the moon. During his orbits around the moon, Collins passed through the dark side twice for about 48 minutes. Collins described the landscape in his memoir as rugged and crater-strewn, from which emanated a strange but beautiful silence. "I am alone now, really alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am. If you were to count, the result would be 3 billion plus 2 on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus who knows what on this side." Michael Collins. Allegedly, UFO enthusiasts and para-researchers want to find hidden clues in confusing passages from Collins's book about what he really saw. Various images that have circulated the web for decades show formations on the far side of the moon that resemble giant spaceships or rocks that look like the remains of a building. What is the truth? It is a fact that today we have a lot of pictures of the backside of the moon by satellite images. Even ordinary internet users today can zoom into the released data at any time and explore the far side of the moon. The official pictures show no or hardly any proof for alien theories. But again and again, NASA insiders claim that this is all a big deception. The satellite images are allegedly censored and even elaborately retouched by hundreds of technicians and image editors. No hint of an alien power or the relics of spaceships or buildings are said to be visible. All references disappear before the pictures are made public. All astronauts who were on the moon and circled it like Collins are supposed to have received a speech prohibition on the part of the powerful ones of NASA after the flights. Allegedly, likewise censored radio recordings are to prove even that Armstrong and Aldrin saw on the moon spaceships. NASA denies such assertions vehemently, and thus it must remain further a mystery what really takes place on the averted side of the moon. Life after Apollo 11. After their return to Earth, the astronauts were questioned for almost a lifetime by journalists about extraterrestrials. Officially, they saw nothing, but again, there are dozens of reports that paint a different picture. Buzz Aldrin's sister is said to have admitted once to a journalist that her brother had been muzzled and suffered very much from it. Quotes from Armstrong are known, according to which he had indicated in private that he and his family were in danger when he talked about certain events of the moon landing. Armstrong tried to escape the hype surrounding him just 2 years after the moon landing by leaving NASA and becoming a professor of aeronautical engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He later promoted various space and education initiatives and sat on the board of several companies. Armstrong died in August 2012 at the age of 82 after complications from heart surgery. If he knew about aliens, he took that secret to his grave. Aldrin also left NASA in 1971 and tried his hand less successfully as commander of a U.S. Air Force test pilot school. The fact that the one-time hero struggled with alcoholism and depression further fueled speculation about a possible pressure and strange experiences during the moon flight. In his numerous books and memoirs, there are supposed to be several allusions to the problems with NASA and the pressure Aldrin had experienced during his experiences. Nevertheless, we can only continue to speculate here. Aldrin is the only Apollo 11 astronaut still alive. In 2023, he celebrated his 93rd birthday and even married his longtime companion. Michael Collins also retired from NASA shortly after Apollo 11 and all but disappeared from the scene. At first, he took a little-noticed public affairs post at the U.S. State Department. Later, he became director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. His autobiography, Carrying the Fire, is considered one of the best astronaut memoirs because of its sensitive and insightful descriptions. Collins died in April 2021 at the age of 90. The challenge of landing. Landings of probes and rovers are still engineering challenges. For the most part, other rovers landed on the Moon or Mars in very safe areas, in large, flat craters, and wherever expensive vehicles and objects like them can be safely set down. Probes like Chang'e 3, but also the Chinese Chang'e probes, are objects costing millions of dollars. Losses are not only hard to bear for science, but also bitter financial setbacks for the nations concerned. The distance of hundreds of thousands or millions of kilometers to landers and rovers requires special radio technologies. Perseverance and Curiosity on Mars, for example, can be very well controlled from Earth. The Indian probes were a different story. The South Pole is so awkwardly located from Earth that radio signals arrive with a 1.4-second delay. That's not enough time to land the devices safely and without delay. So, Vikram was equipped with a fully automated landing system. Using cameras and sensors, the lander scanned the terrain as it approached the surface. Every bump and rock was registered. Vikram's software was able to adjust the flight path to the conditions at any time, and so the spacecraft touched down gently on the lunar surface on August 23, 2023. Chandrayaan-1 to 3. Chandrayaan-3 is now to complete what the Indian Space Agency ISRO had been preparing for years. Chandrayaan-1 is an orbiter that has already been orbiting the Moon for several years. Actually, Chandrayaan-2 should have landed on the Moon as early as 2019, but the mission failed. The lander had difficulties during the descent, went off course, and a software error made the mission finally go wrong. The lander crashed and has been lost ever since. This year, India again launched nearly identical probes. Vikram and Pragyan were improved a bit and successfully reached the Moon. After landing, Vikram released his little companion from its safekeeping inside the lander. Pragyan rolled down a ramp and did a few laps in the lunar dust. The pictures of the premiere went around the world and thrilled millions of people. Vikram's tasks are to measure temperatures at the South Pole, record vibrations, and conduct studies of the Moon's almost non-existent atmosphere. The goals of the rover Pragyan, which weighs only 26 kilograms, are small reconnaissance missions. So far, however, Pragyan has not gone far. Only a little more than a week after landing did the lunar night fall, and Pragyan was put to sleep after covering 101 meters. On September 2, 2023, the 14-day lunar night dawned, and absolute darkness and freezing cold prevailed at the Moon's South Pole. The lander Vikram followed its small companion into sleep on September 4th, and 14 days later, both probes were to awaken again. Unfortunately, their hopes were not fulfilled. When the temperature at the landing site had risen above -10 degrees Celsius from September 22nd, the radio systems of the lander and rover should have activated automatically. But so far, ISRO experts listened for signals in vain. As of the publication date of this video, investigations are still ongoing. Although the Indian Space Agency has not officially confirmed the premature loss of the probes, it is highly likely that Vikram and Pragyan's technology could not withstand the more than -100-degree lunar night despite their best hopes. ISRO had decided not to equip either lander or rover with radionuclide heaters. On Mars rovers, such heating elements prevent the electronic components from dying of cold. It looks as if India will have to accept another setback. The mission of the two probes was supposed to last 5 months. India's space goals. India has been in the space business at least as long as the US or Russia. In the 1960s, Indians began launching their first satellites into space. The space program was started by a physicist, astronomer, and scientist named Vikram, who is now the namesake for India's first lunar rover. Of course, India hopes to strengthen its own position in the global space race, as well as gain economic and political advantages. It's remarkable what Indian scientists have pulled off on a budget that is tiny compared to the sums available to NASA. NASA was hoping for Indian success because the mission can provide valuable data for the upcoming Artemis missions, and India might have considered participating in the Mars settlement. Russia's Lunar 25 bust. Russia also wanted to shine by landing at the Moon's South Pole and studying ice deposits there. The ambitious Lunar 25 mission was planned as a triumph in the country's space history and ended in a dramatic fiasco. On August 20th, 2023, Russia launched its $150 million Lunar 25 spacecraft from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Just 3 days after launch, on August 23rd, technical difficulties arose during its descent to the Moon. Communication systems showed anomalies and navigation instruments failed. The control center on Earth watched with bated breath as the probe hurtled uncontrollably toward the lunar surface. Despite the desperate attempts to stabilize the probe, the impact could not be avoided. The mission ended in a crater far from the planned landing site. The bust is similar to the failed Chandrayaan-2 mission and is also a major setback for Russian spaceflight. China's unusual moon discovery. While India and Russia mourn their failed missions, China celebrates one lunar success after another. The Chinese are not active at the South Pole, but they have sent a rover to a no less exotic area, the far side of the Moon. There are numerous legends surrounding this place, and some believe that there has been mining activity on the far side of the Moon for a long time, as well as a space station of extraterrestrial beings. Chang'e 5 has not found any aliens yet, but it has found something that may make further pole missions unnecessary. In a spectacular mission, the rover sent samples of moon rocks back to Earth, and Chinese scientists found enormous amounts of water in them. In fact, it turned out that the lunar soil is full of tiny glass beads with water trapped inside. If future settlers want to extract water on the Moon, they probably won't have to build a pipeline to the South Pole at all. The water from the glass beads can be extracted anywhere on the Moon only by heating the lunar rock. During the 36th lunar day, the Chinese Success rover made another fascinating discovery in the Kármán crater on the far side of the Moon. The object was sighted from a distance of about 80 meters, roughly the length of a soccer field. Similarities to a hut led to numerous speculations about the nature of the object. Had Chang'e 5 finally found evidence of extraterrestrial activity on the Moon? Experts rather suspect a large boulder, which visually only resembles a hut from a distance. The formation could be a remnant of a significant impact event. Currently, investigations of the object are ongoing, and Chang'e 5 will slowly approach the hut over the course of a 2 or 3 month journey. Mysterious rocket crash on the Moon. On March 4, 2022, a rocket body collided with the lunar surface, initially resulting in a new double crater. This unusual crater was discovered by NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been orbiting the Moon since 2009. The impact created 2 overlapping craters, an eastern crater 18 meters in diameter and a western crater 16 meters in diameter. Although astronomers had expected the impact after discovering that the rocket piece was on a collision course with the Moon, the double crater was a surprise. The exact origin of the rocket body remains unclear. Initially, it was believed to be a stage of the SpaceX Falcon rocket that launched the U.S. Deep Space Climate Observatory in 2015. However, it was later corrected that it likely came from a Chinese lunar mission in 2014. Nevertheless, the Chinese Foreign Ministry denied that the booster came from its Chang'e 5 lunar mission. The confusion over the origin of the rocket stage has underscored the need to more closely monitor space debris in deep space surveillance. Meanwhile, on the Moon, something else highly peculiar occurred as a result of the crash. After the impact, lunar seismometers recorded steady tremors. It is unusual for an impact to cause such intense vibrations that sound like a reverberating gong. The hollow moon theory. A very similar phenomenon appeared once before when astronauts on the Apollo 12 mission intentionally crashed their lunar module onto the lunar surface. Then too, the seismometers that had been placed on the Moon since Apollo 11 registered long-lasting vibrations. Similar vibrations were also detected after the controlled crash of the 3rd stage of the Apollo 13 mission's Saturn V rocket onto the Moon. The vibrations penetrated to a depth of more than 35 kilometers. This response from the Moon indicates that it's not completely solid and led to speculation that large portions of the Moon may be hollow. However, a hollow moon would not be a natural phenomenon and could indicate artificial intervention. The far side of the Moon. As mentioned, U-22 has been investigating the far side of the Moon for 3 years now. Specifically, it's the first rover ever to directly explore this area of the satellite. Since the Moon has a bound rotation, which means that it always faces our blue home planet on one and the same side, we are not allowed to look at the opposite area from our terrestrial point of view at any time. In fact, the Apollo astronauts are still the only people in history who have seen the backside of the Moon with their own eyes. However, thanks to images taken over the years by the probes of the International Space Agencies, we now know quite a bit about the appearance of the far side of the Moon. Even at first glance, it's clear that the dark regions, meaning lowlands covered by lava, are much more rare on the side facing away from the Earth than on the opposite area of the celestial body. In detail, this also means that the far side of the Moon has a higher reflectivity than the side presented to us. In view of this fact, we also understand why the often used expression, dark side of the moon could not be more misleading. The truth is that the region of the satellite away from the Earth also goes through the typical lunar phases, just in the opposite order. Due to the higher albedo, the backside of the satellite actually shines brighter than the front side does during the corresponding phase. Why the Chinese Space Agency decided to explore the far side of the celestial body in the context of our soft lunar landing becomes clear when we consider the role that this area could play in future space missions. In fact, the region of the moon facing away from the Earth appears to be particularly promising when it comes to carrying out especially sensitive measurements. Researchers would be able to carry out their work there without the distorting effects of interfering terrestrial lights and radio traffic. The flip side, however, is that telemetry, or in other words, the transmission of measured values to Earth, could only be carried out using complex lunar satellites. Before this can happen, however, the characteristics and nature of the corresponding lunar region must first be analyzed in detail. In order to achieve this as comprehensively as possible, U-22 was equipped with various complex payloads, which we would like to take a closer look at together with you. The rover's equipment. In order for U-22 to be able to transmit an authentic impression of the shape of the moon's far side, the land vehicle is equipped with a panoramic camera that can take pictures with a resolution of up to 1 millimeter per pixel. In this way, detailed three-dimensional images are obtained, which form an important basis for research in the geological structure and surface morphology. The LPR ground-penetrating radar is similar in design to the equipment used by U-2's predecessor spacecraft. With the help of LPR, which has two different channels, the rover can measure the subsurface structure of the moon's far side. In detail, the radar is able to look up to 300 feet deep into the subsurface. To analyze the mineralogical composition of the lunar surface, the VNIS imaging infrared spectrometer is used. Attached to the front of the rover's housing, the spectrometer operates in both visible light and infrared. Meanwhile, ASAN, a neutral atom detector, is the only payload on U-22 that was not designed and developed in China. It came from the Swedish Institute of Space Physics. And in fact, the device is already credited with revealing an unexpected fact. Normally, about 20% of the solar wind hitting the lunar surface is reflected in the form of energy-neutral atoms. Surprisingly, however, the corresponding reflection near the landing site was 10% higher than expected. Incidentally, what applies to us humans can also be applied to U-22. The rover has to sleep regularly. As soon as night approaches on the moon, the land vehicle must move to its pre-selected sleeping place. U-22 then points its solar module to the east, folds its parabolic antenna and camera into its housing, over which it pulls its mobile solar cell wings to cover itself and protect it from the cold of the lunar night. Unlike on Earth, the days and nights on our natural companion last 14 Earth days each. When the back of the moon is bathed in sunlight again, U-22 automatically awakens from its slumber and readies its component for use. But the rover also appreciates a midday nap during the mid-hours of the long lunar days. When the thermometer climbs to over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the rover completes a 78-hour rest period during which it stays put. Now that we understand how U-22 works and what payloads it has, it's time to take a look at the exciting discoveries the Chinese land vehicle has been able to track down so far. Glass beads on the moon. When we think of the surface of Earth's moon, images of endless, dusty, cratered landscapes immediately come to mind. Beyond these familiar features, however, the satellite of our blue home planet is home to many other exciting formations, such as the tiny, translucent, lunar glass spheres that U-22 discovered just a short time ago. But what is the background of these fascinating objects? How could glass beads of just about an inch in diameter be formed on the satellite? If one follows the explanation of the responsible research team from China, then it was a violent impact on the moon's surface that caused the glassy balls to develop. According to this, an object once struck the outside of the satellite, causing the lunar rock to melt. In detail, the lunar crust is largely composed of silicate minerals, which are classified in the group of so-called feldspars. The glowing melting process, which was set in motion by the impact on the lunar surface, finally resulted in the formation of drop-shaped glass spheres. In the process, the iron-poor lunar rock managed to condense in time after melting, paving the way for the exciting discovery by the Chinese rover. In the process, the transparent objects could provide important insights into the general course of impacts on the moon as part of future investigations. The Lunar Lodge. In the fall of 2021, U-22 strayed into an extremely rough lunar region. To discern how to guide the rover back to safe territory, Chinese researchers decided to have the land vehicle take a panoramic image of the terrain in question. When the experts looked at the images, it didn't take long for their gaze to touch on an unusual detail. On the northern horizon, in the immediate vicinity of a fairly recent impact site, was an object that appeared almost cube-shaped within the image. But how could it be that such a structure with perfect edges graced the surface of our satellite? Since scientists did not know at first what the ominous object was, it was initially referred to as the mysterious hut. Of course, it didn't take long before the wildest speculations about the moon cabin were voiced on the web. Quite a few users considered it conceivable that it could actually be the structure of an unknown alien civilization. However, the researchers did not want to enter the realm of conjecture and instructed the technicians to get as close as possible to the structure, which was about 250 feet away. Since the published pictures triggered a gigantic meteor echo, as already mentioned, the terrestrial researchers worked with high pressure to reach the mysterious hut as quickly as possible and to crown crude theories with actual facts. On December 27, 2021, the time had finally come. U-22 approached the supposedly cube-shaped object to within 30 feet and was able to examine the structure for the first time from a very short distance. The images that the rover then took made all the speculations about extraterrestrial structures collapse like houses of cards. The Moon Lodge was simply an ordinary rock at the edge of the impact crater. Seen at close range, the structure no longer appeared cube-shaped, but rather reminded us of a rabbit crouching in front of a carrot. In reference to this picture and to the name of the rover, the former mysterious hut was therefore also baptized Jade Rabbit. Now we want your opinion. What do you think about the exciting research mission of U-22 and the discoveries the rover has already made during its mission? Drop us your thoughts, suggestions, and feedback on today's video in the comments below. Are you in the mood for more interesting videos about the most exciting discoveries in the universe? Then take a look at the other posts on our channel, which you can access by clicking on one of the images in the credits. Thanks for your interest, take care, and we'll see you next time.